Good morning and welcome to the first webinar in this year's Digital Construction Summit, brought to you by Construction Management, the CIOB, Glider, Alicosoft, Trimble and RIB Software. This session is entitled Turning Handover Information into Operational Intelligence in association with Glider. And I've temporarily lost, there we go. Before we crack on, I'd like to remind you of the other webinars that form this year's summit. Tomorrow at 11 a.m, Alicosoft and the Get It Right initiative will feature in the session entitled The Key to On-Site Productivity, Eliminate the Errors. You can register for that at the website address you can see there, bit.ly/no more errors. Then next Tuesday, the 28th, the CIB's Innovation and Digital Advisory Panel and Trimble will discuss digitizing the Program Management Office. You can register for that at bit.ly/AIPMO. And on the 5th of November, you can expect some fireworks from RIB Software, Balfour Beatty and Arcadis as they discuss project controls on major schemes. Register for that at bit.ly/RIB Arcadis. Well, let's concentrate on the here and now. Our programme this morning. The quality of information at project completion is critical, not only for compliance, but also for long-term value across the asset lifecycle. This session will explore how structured building information enables contractors to meet client requirements while giving owners and operators the tools to drive efficiency and ensure regulatory confidence. It will also examine how digital innovation is being applied to both new build programs and the digitization of legacy information, ensuring data serves operational needs long after construction is complete. There'll be a Q&A session at the end. Let me introduce our speakers. You're going to hear from Nick Hutchinson, founder and managing partner at Glider Technology, and Bryn Turner, asset management lead of accommodation asset information at the Defence Infrastructure Organisation. I'm Justin Stanton, editor of Construction Management Digital. I'm your chair this morning. Before we dive into the webinar, there's a bit of housekeeping. Please use the Q&A function, not the chat function. Please use the Q&A function to ask questions of the speakers. You can ask questions anonymously or as yourself. However, please note, should we run out of time, anonymous questions can't be answered afterwards. Please keep questions relevant to today's topic. Our panelists will address your questions in the Q&A session at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to watch on demand via the original registration page later today. There is 1 hour's CPD credit for those who complete this webinar live. CPD certificates will be issued later this week. You can only qualify for a CPD credit if you are watching via your own registration link. That's enough of that. So, Nick, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you ever so much, Justin, and welcome to everybody that's taking the time out to attend today's session. We hope you find it interesting and enlightening. So I'm Nick Hutchinson, founder and managing partner at Glider, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Bryn Turner from the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, otherwise known as the DIO. And that's the organisation that's responsible for managing one of the UK's largest and most complex estates. At Glider, I've been leading the team, spending many years now, about 21 to be precise, helping asset owners, operators and their supply chains get real value from their building information. And the quality of that information at project completion, in our opinion, is absolutely critical. Not just for contractual and legal compliance, but for unlocking long-term operational value. So over the next 45 minutes, Bryn and I will be discussing how the DIO is approaching this challenge, from improving data at handover to enabling a estate-wide asset intelligence. And as Justin quite rightly pointed out, we'll finish up with a short audience Q&A at the end. So let's begin. So Bryn, can you start by introducing yourself briefly and then painting a picture of the defence estate for everyone on the webinar today? So what scale are we talking about? and what are some of the challenges that come with managing data across such a vast and varied portfolio? Bryn.
Yeah, no worries. Good morning, everybody. So as introduced, I'm Bryn Turner. I'm the asset management lead within Defence Homes, which is an element of DIO. So as Nick says, Defence's estate is international in nature, but within the UK, it covers more than 1% of the total land mass alone. So it covers a significant area. Defence Homes sits within that, and we manage over 55,000 built assets, which is everything from housing, garages, play parks, roads, as well as utilities infrastructure. And those built assets are supported by more than 1 million lower level assets. So it's quite an extensive estate that brings an awful lot of data with it. What drives that is it's an extremely diverse estate. So it spans everything from 18th century buildings to brand new constructions that are less than 6 months old. And that diversity in itself creates huge challenges, especially in the data management space, which is what we're here to talk about today. The longevity and complexity of the estate, coupled with the changing legislation and the changing landscape within the UK, mean that we're constantly having to review the validity and maturity of our data.
I love that statistic, Bryn. So I think it's about 1.8% of the UK's landmass is owned, operated by the MOD, quite a staggering statistic. And just to add a bit more colour to that, approximately how many direct suppliers does the DIO appoint to design, build, operate, and maintain that estate?
Good question. It will be more than 50 in any one given year.
Yeah.
Hundreds over the span of a contract, and that's tier one. That's before you get down into the supply chain. So there's a lot of people feeding a lot of information back in at various points of the process.
And give us an idea of the level of the size of the budget that's required per annum to design, construct, refurbish, operate, and maintain that estate.
You're talking billions. I mean, within accommodation alone, hundreds of millions a year to our tier one, which over the span of a contract soon adds up into several £billion, and then that's spanned out across construction, etc. So significant sums of money across the lifespan of what is typically a 5 to 7 year contract.
And can you tell the audience what's driving the renewed focus on improving information management at DIO?
Yeah, so we've got several drivers, many of which are shared with the private sector. So things like we're looking to drive operational efficiency, we want to reduce downtime, meeting any new legislative requirements and supporting sort of what are becoming increasingly data hungry modern systems. But due to the scale of our estate and also the people that we support on our estate, we do have the unique driver, which is for us to support the service families who ultimately live and work in the infrastructure that we in Defence Homes manage. So whilst, yes, okay, that might not be seen as compliance, for us it is, because compliance isn't just about meeting our legal standards. It's about us living up to our commitments, values, service standards, but we require well-managed data to underpin all of that in order to improve the service that we offer them. And so for us, this whole journey has been about understanding it. It starts right at the project inception. It goes through handover of that asset and ultimately into the long-term management of that asset, because we have service users at every point of that. And that's what we want to be able to, that's what's driving our focus on improving what the data we hold.
Excellent. So let's focus now then on that pretty crucial stage in any building life cycle, that handover stage, or REBA stage 6, the point where the construction phase meets that operational phase. And in our experience of delivering around 500 construction projects per annum, that's where a lot of the value gets lost and many opportunities are missed from an estate team operational sort of readiness perspective. But from your perspective, what are the most common issues that you see with handover?
Yeah, so we obviously, due to the legacy size of our estate, the availability of information is a big one. We do see a lot of legacy issues rooted in how the construction and design phases have historically prioritised exactly that, design and build. And there's been very little emphasis in our space on the actual life cycle management, the onward management of that asset. So when we've traditionally got handover packs, it often lacks the detail that we need in order to properly plan maintenance in accordance with SFG and other standards. or that information that is provided is trapped in what are traditionally non-accessible documentation styles for systems, so PDFs, Excel workbooks. So you're then putting workarounds in to get the information out of them and into your respective system. And so we get, traditionally the packs have been quite unstructured in nature rather than structured. I do like to use the saying internally that it's a 21st century challenge that's been managed with 20th century methods. And so that's the big one. It's the availability and the structured nature of the data we receive, because historically the information has focused solely on the design and build with very little emphasis on the lifecycle management post that point.
Excellent. And that's something that at Glider we call the handover chasm, where projects may finish strong in terms of construction and the physical activities to hand over a building, but the information that then supports the ongoing operation and maintenance is often incomplete, poor requirements, or in some cases missing entirely. But moreover, what we see more and more is not so much the construction team that's underperforming, but actually a lack of understanding within the estate team on how they plan to use, maintain, and ultimately benefit from what's becoming a massive handover information. So in your opinion, how can we close that gap? Is it better processes, clearer requirements, better technology, or tighter alignment between construction or development teams and the operational equivalent?
So it's all of it. It's all of the above for me. As you quite rightly say, this isn't a belief that what's happening at the construction stage and the design stage is wrong. I think it's just historically the sector has been able to deal with the lack of information through experience in FM providers, but due to the scale, the size, the speed of estates, we're now needing to transition that data sort of chasm, as you call it, which is a great way of describing it. I think for me, clearer information requirements is an absolute must. I'll forever bang that drum. And they're generated by bringing your facility management experts and as well as your asset managers into the conversation earlier. I think fostering that stronger collaboration between projects and operations teams is absolutely key. I think all too often there's this sort of virtual brick wall between the two sides and they don't speak. And I think improving that collaboration would really help. Standards like ISO 19650 and 55000, they definitely help. But I think, and this is one that's quite close to my heart, we also need to recognize that managing and using data is a skill set in itself. Now, that's not to say that everybody needs to be a data scientist that's dealing with it. That's where platforms like Nexus and others bridge the gap. But a fundamental understanding of data principles is vital if you're going to be in a position where you're now transitioning that data over at handover into systems that need to absorb it.
Excellent. And you've been leading some pretty major work within defence homes to address that problem, turning handover data into operational intelligence. So can you share in a bit more detail precisely what you're doing differently on recent programs?
Yeah, so it's quite a complex position that we're in. We're trying to improve legacy information whilst also capture new information at the right standards. So you've got two different approaches going on. But what we did is we effectively recognized early that the data wasn't where it needed to be in both instances, be that new builds or legacy. Because a lot of our estate is historic, that drove a greater focus on the legacy information because that's ultimately where we had the biggest exposure. And again, because it's historic, we didn't really get complete digital handover packs, and we don't now because they're built, they're in function, they're not happening. So what we did is we began to focus on the flow of data coming in to us from day-to-day operations. So information that's arriving continuously through that life cycle, that asset's life cycle, and not just at the point of handover. So that meant we identified trigger events across the estate and points at which really useful data is generated that meets our information requirement. So things like inspections, repairs, maintenance visits. And then we focused on capturing that in a really structured way so that we were, from that point on, capturing the information that met our requirements in a structured way. And it meant we weren't just growing the chasm. Then to make sure that obviously the validity of that data is key, and to make sure what was coming in is what we needed, we introduce validation both at source, so when it's captured, but also when it arrives into the system. So you've got a two-tier check-in. Now that's improved the accuracy, and in turn, that's improved the confidence. And what that ultimately does is create a positive feedback loop where errors are flagged, fixed, and we learn from those errors and we go, okay, right, that validation didn't work. How do we twist it? Oh, actually, we need to refine that information requirement, which then feeds into the future iterations. So we very much, what we've done is we've shifted the mindset. So from handover as like a one-off event to handover as a continuous process. You're continually handing information over during the life cycle of that asset. And every data exchange contributes towards that operational intelligence picture, okay? And so the work's still going on. I don't want to sit here and claim we're all perfect and it's all singing and dancing. But even now with the progress we've made, we're able to define with a lot greater accuracy what information we require and when we require it within the operational delivery space. That has the knock-on effect of us being able to begin to improve the information requirements, which are then provided as part of the design and develop stages. So now we're back into the start of the life cycle. And ultimately, that information requirement generates the correct information during construction and design, which ends up in the digital handover pack, which then ends up in the hands of operations, and we can just pick it up and run. So again, it's using the whole process to define those requirements. So the key piece really in all of that is that by knowing what information we need across every stage of the life cycle, not just design and develop, we're able to then look at how we then procure future contracts and contract accordingly to make sure that that data is provisioned so that we don't get into an FM contract that hasn't provisioned for the data capture on some piece of complex equipment, etc., that has sensors and systems that we need to monitor. And ultimately that then we're hoping will drive a reduction in the cost variance in future contracts, because we're not then having to augment future contracts to handle like data that wasn't sort of costed for or allowed for.
Fantastic. So really useful insight there. As a pretty mature asset owner, you've really thought long and hard about the operational use cases for building information and asset data, and then work backwards from there to understand, with that understanding, to ask for that information in a subtly but more structured way. What are some of are there any sort of industry standards for classification or data models that you've used in the procurement of that information?
So we've used 19650 as a handhold around its core themes and principles. Obviously, that's what it's there for to do. We've also drawn quite extensively on RICS's new rules of measurement, particularly NRM3, which has allowed us to bring sort of a standardized codification to assets, allowed us to align to standardized maximum asset lives or expected end of lives. And we've sort of drawn on chartered or recognized standards. So within the maintenance space, we draw quite extensively on SFG, which, whilst not a data standard, clearly lays out what actions should be happening at what points, which means we can then infer the data requirements from that.
Yeah. And to be precise, that's the SFG 20.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Maintenance. Fantastic. And you've also picked up on what we see to be a significant gap in adopting information management practices across as a state, and that is the procurement stage. It's absolutely ensuring that the conversations are happening robustly between your teams, the users of the information, and the commercial teams that are effectively procuring not just the data, but the services required and perhaps technology that's required from your supply chains. So give it to me. What seismic results have you seen from adopting this new approach?
So I think the biggest one for us is what I would consider a soft one. It's just the improvement in confidence across our operational teams that the data and information they're seeing in the systems and they're ultimately making decisions on with their industry partners is right and is accurate. And so that means we're not getting stuck into the cycle of operations say that we need to change pump X, but the industry partner says, well, actually, we changed that pump 3 months ago. And then you're into that commercial position of we've told them to do it, but should they do it because it doesn't offer value of money, etc. So it's seen a drastic reduction in those kind of delays whilst we agree a commercial position or we agree a financial position, because everybody's singing from the same data sheet effectively. And we've also seen a quite drastic reduction in the time spent on verification. So is the boiler serial number right? When it's registering its warranty, the warranty details right, etc. We've seen a big reduction in that. And at the higher level of sort of the organization, I think this is the power out there in private sector, is the senior teams now feel like they have a much clearer insight into the estate, which is driving their confidence in the sort of compliance and safety position, and also in the operational expenditure position, understanding where our sort of large outlays in IDAL and CDAL are, and what we can do to reduce OPEX, etc. And so for me, these initial improvements, I say we're still on that journey, are beginning to prove how powerful structured information can be. The key is once it's trusted, once people trust what they're seeing.
Fantastic. So we've touched on it slightly there. You mentioned Nexus. So just for the listeners, Nexus is Glider's next generation, a statewide asset intelligence platform that will be launching formally at the Digital Construction North event in November. So let's talk about technology. We've talked about the need for requirements, better processes, and of course people that need to be able to upskill and deliver against those requirements. But technology plays a really important part, and of course we are a technology provider to the DIO. We describe Nexus as the asset master, a single sort of truth that becomes a golden thread that the asset owner owns from project conception all the way through design, construction, commissioning, handover, then throughout that building or facilities life cycle. But from your perspective as the end user and owner of that information, what do platforms like Nexus support for organizations like the DIO?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a great question and a great topic, and as you know well, because we've discussed it at length previously, it's close to my heart, really. So platforms like Nexus, for me, they're the next step in the management of infrastructure data. They're where we're heading. For me, they close that traditional gap between development operations and effectively drives an organization's use of AI, machine learning, predictive analysis to support those two areas. And platforms like Nexus are actually, in my view, essential for anybody or any organization that's looking to draw on AI, machine learning, predictive analysis, because they force that structured holding of the data, which is fundamental to being able to do successful advanced analytics. Within defense homes, I see platforms like Nexus evolving into sort of what I'd call a true asset management platform. So not just your traditional transactional like CAFM, but one that can take all aspects of estate management, so both the soft and hard, the commercial, the financial, but also key, and this is where I think it differs from a CAFM, not just from a maintenance and transactional sort of work task-based approach, but right through all aspects of experience. So in our case, the occupant's experience. So information that's relevant to an occupant can be provisioned. Information that I need as an asset manager can be provisioned. The operational teams can get what they need, commercial can get what they need, etc. So it's a singular system. And by centralizing that information and data, but in a structured way that's controlled, it keeps both the golden thread intact, but also makes it more accessible to those user groups without having to try and pull it out and tailor it to this, tailor it to that. It puts it all in the same place. You're all drawing from it in the same place. You can begin to do your advanced analytics, but you can all get your sort of niche view that you require.
Fantastic. And I think you've picked up on something that's pretty close to my heart, and that is not all roads lead to the CAFM for a building operator and estate team. It's a very important piece of technology across that estate ecosystem of platforms. But it's, as you say, those types of systems have been born out of the need to be able to plan and record work done across an estate, which is an essential part of the golden thread, but doesn't provide all the answers that an estate team demand from their data. So really important that we pick that out. Do you think there's an opportunity and a need across industry to create perhaps a a new paradigm of platform like Nexus that provides more and complementary capabilities to a more traditional CAFM?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if we want to get into a true asset management position and a true whole estate management, not just an operational management, we need centralized platforms that do that. There are lots of individual platforms out there that do lots of individual bits of it and do it very well. But what we've never really seen, or what I've never really come across, is a platform that can holistically do it all, and that you can truly manage an estate within. So I think there's absolutely a need in the industry for that.
Good. And one of the sort of topics of conversation we often come up against when we're talking to large estate owners like yourselves is they wish they had large capital programs like the DIO, because that would bring about opportunities to invest in highly digital models produced by their supply chain. But of course, that's not the reality for large estate owners that perhaps don't have those large budgets and are doing everything they can to get by managing a pretty aging legacy estate. So where, in your opinion, where should asset owners begin their digitization journey if they are an owner of perhaps an aging or legacy estate?
Yeah, so I think take confidence from us. Predominantly our estate is an old and aging estate. So this is something we've got real experience in. The key steps for me is start by validating your portfolio. Make sure you understand what your portfolio is and identify the critical assets within that portfolio. So they're the ones that would cause the biggest operational and compliance risk if the data were missing. Sounds really simple and basic. And if you do it properly, it's really powerful. Then once you've got that, prioritize the attributes that really matter to you. If budget's limited, you're not going to be able to go after every single attribute that you want to on an asset. So prioritize what's really important to you as an organization, what fits your strategy, what fits your compliance needs, etc. And then capture what you can, manage it, store it, and use it effectively, because that in itself will then generate the returns that can then fund another iteration. I think what's really key is if your current systems can't handle the data that you need them to, it may be worth investing in one that can, and don't be afraid of that investment. That investment pays off really quickly through increased efficiency and assurance. So I think just be pragmatic about how you approach it, be realistic as to what you need. There's a temptation to say we need everything. You often don't. Be realistic about what you need, and that in itself will then help prioritize how you approach the estate.
Super. So take a step back and look at your DIO journey so far. What lessons would you share with others, those on the webinar today and watching thereafter? What lessons would you share with others starting out?
Start small and be prepared to adjust. Sounds really odd, but initially we tried to bite off more than we could. Really, in realistic, we've been more than we understood, and we've had to tail that back and become more programmatic about it. So start small, and the key is be prepared to adjust. So treat data management as a skill and invest in it. Make sure you have the right staff who understand data and can work with people like Glider and other people to obviously generate what you need. Bring operations in the room from day one. And then a key is partner with technology providers that will go on the journey with you. Sounds quite cheesy, but it is fundamental if you're going to achieve this. So, our collaboration with yourselves has been key because it's been open, iterative. We've focused on solutions, and we've both been on the same journey, and we've both been honest with each other about what the art of the possible is, which has meant we can be realistic in our expectations, and we also generate a better base data set because it's been created properly with the right fundamentals. And so we've come a long way. We've got a long way to go, but start small and be prepared to adjust, because you won't start off on the right road. You're going to have to readjust your tack. And that's where having a partner who's collaborative really helps, because they can adjust with you veer and haul as you need to.
Super. So you've touched on it there. For the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, give us your vision for the next 5 years. I think that's sensible to predict where you might be in the next 5.
Yeah, so for me, obviously, I'm quite keen on the digital side of things, really want to drive that. And I genuinely think we're entering a phase where within both FM, capital delivery, operations in general, data analytics and machine learning are going to end up sitting core of what they do, and ultimately at the core of estate management. We're in an ever increasingly digitized world, and they're going to creep in. They already have. So things like digital twins, Internet of Things, sensors, as they become more common, data flow will continuously increase between systems. You'll increasingly end up in the world of big data, and platforms like Nexus, they'll make that information visible, accessible, actionable to users. But ultimately, that's where I think the industry is going to end up in the next 5 years. I think we'll see fully digital estates where decisions become much more live in a sense. They're made much quicker, but also they're validated and there's intelligence there. But it all starts at that, get your data right. So I think the next 5 years, we'll see a really significant shift in the industry towards proper data management and proper exploitation of that data.
Superb. And what an exciting vision that sounds. I think you've picked on a really important point. I mean, AI is a game changer. It's disrupting so many different things across design, construction, and I think more recently now, estate teams are starting to think about how they might leverage AI. And certainly at Glider, we're researching and developing some pretty innovative new capabilities with regards to information management. But getting that foundation right is absolutely key, that information data foundation. And you've touched on some important points there. Fantastic. Well, right on time. That brings us to a conclusion of the initial conversation. So if Justin's around, we'd like to enter the Q&A phase. Justin.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Bryn. Yeah, we've got loads of questions already in, but don't be afraid to ask your question if you haven't yet. This one's for Bryn. I'm going to kind of take them from the top, I think. And this might be a bit of a yes/no answer, Bryn, but you may have to give some context to it. Catherine Romanis Richards asks, is the MOD exempt from BSA Old Crown immunity?
Complicated question, not one that I'm best placed to answer, but sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Right, okay. Thank you for that. Okay. Charles Keating asks, if you are saying you do not have the right information at handover, then why do you not specify what you want and in what format?
So that was the old issue, Charles. We said, we just want data, and we got given data, but it ultimately wasn't the data that we wanted. So that's kind of the journey we've been on, is making sure we define that data at procurement point. So really solid information requirements so that the tier ones or others know what they're provisioning at what points in the stage, that we get what we want, because historically that's where it's fallen down. I don't know if you want to add to that, Nick.
Yeah, I would like to. There's been a tremendous amount of work and effort across the DIO, different business areas, which isn't just the accommodation space. We've got the wider built estate and, of course, large capital programs for construction. So significant work has already gone into develop what's the DIO called the reference data library, which is many data requirements, standards, procedures, specifications. The asset data requirements is key to that, the ADR, and that goes some way to providing high definition around information requirements at handover. But that work continues as that maturity increases across the business. Hopefully that goes some way to answer that question.
Brilliant. Okay. Someone asked, Bryn, what contract form do you use, and do you amend your contracts to include special clauses about data handover?
Yes, so we do have data-specific clauses within contracts. Historically, they probably haven't been as robust as they could have been. And again, that's all part of the journey we're on. They're becoming increasingly robust. We do go through periods of reflection and updates to increase the robustness of it, but in collaboration with the partners that have to provide it, because we're very cognizant that if we just all of a sudden turn around and completely change the landscape, it has quite a big operational impact on them. But yes, we do amend contracts, and we do learn from the process that we're going through so that we get it right in future contracts.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that, I think JSP 850, if memory serves me correct, is about the handover of building projects. More recently, there's a big drive with regards to government soft landings and how that's being adopted to really bridge that gap between the construction of assets and the ongoing operation and maintenance. And of course, the pretty standard BIM specifications, your exchange information requirements, and supporting specs are being developed and rolled out via the commercial teams where relevant.
Yeah. Just perhaps additional to that, Nick. I mean, do you have a preference? Do you offer any advice to clients about, this might be a better contract form, in order to have a good soft landing and appropriate handover?
We recommend the adoption of 19650, ISO 19650. So not particularly advice on specific contract forms, but the specification requirements, literature and documentation to support a contract form. That's what we advise. But as Bryn touched on, the devil's in the detail. So we spend probably more time collaborating and identifying key stakeholders, ensuring that they have a voice and input into the lower level specification for information and how it's going to be used and the benefits it's going to bring. I think that allows people to come on the journey a lot easier. Why are we doing this? Why are we spending so much time and effort producing this information in a specific form? Understanding that, I think, brings people on the journey.
Yeah. Just while you're touching on 19650, let's address that. Couple of questions down. Someone asked, Bryn, how have you found using 19650?
Yeah, great question. So I think what we found is if we tried to stick to it too dogmatically, it did generate problems. But actually, if you take the core intent of what it's saying, which is effectively understand the data you want, be secure about the way that you retrieve it and handle it appropriately, it's actually really helpful. As with all these standards, they're written in such a way that they are potentially open to interpretation by different people. So we've just chosen to focus on the core themes of what it's telling us rather than specifically, we must do this because 19650 says so.
Yeah. Nick, any thoughts on that?
I was busy reading some of the other questions. Forgive me. There was a good question here, which expertly maneuver to, and that is, how does our CAFM software interface with software the building contractors will be using? So I think there's two phases to that. Firstly, it's about the mobilization of CAFM software or similar capabilities at the outset of a new building operation, that handover stage. So what we're trying to achieve there is a digital soft landing to ensure that the data that's required of the CAFM to mobilize the data structures, the pick lists, the information and classification systems are well understood early. And the DIO is pretty unique in that they have several very large FM contractors across their estate, across the built estate and accommodation, each using their own proprietary CAFM softwares. So that becomes a challenge in its own right. What our platform is there to do is become the master record for asset data, which is a structured data model that is then the master that FM supply chains and their CAFMs should really adopt and read to. We then got the additional challenge of data parity. So how do we maintain data parity between an asset owner's system of record and FM teams' own systems that are required for their sort of downstream operational use and management of their supply chains? So the DIO has invested significantly in what they call their data gateway or API layer that provides for synchronization of asset information between their master systems of record and their FM supply chains systems. So a huge amount of effort that's required there at the API level, but also the data structures, classification systems, nomenclatures that are used to describe assets and their systems. So pretty big challenge for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And all right, talking about a further big challenge. So Elif asks, how do you this is I think for Bryn, how do you manage retrofit projects or minor upgrade projects information in terms of updating the legacy information, 2D/3D or just data, so the data is always up to date and does not decay?
Yeah, so obviously a major challenge on any estate, and especially a large one, because what you don't want to do is spend all that effort correcting it and then it just instantly become out of dated. So that's where our upfront validation has become really key. So we now have as automated as we can processes in place where the engineer, for example, puts a new boiler in, they fill in the asset details there and then on site. That then filters through various processes and refreshes within the systems, and the API gateway that Nick just touched on then ensures that all the systems are aligned that need to be aligned. In terms of if we've done like a major or even a minor structural change, so we've done a kitchen dining knock through, or we've knocked other rooms together, there is a process in place that does require a surveyor or somebody qualified to go in, read through the floor plan, and again, that's loaded into the system and filters through. We're not at the stage yet where we have 3D models for a lot of our estates. We're just beginning that journey. And again, that will then feed into that process so that the model's updated, etc. So we're predominantly in the 2D space at the moment. So in summary, it's about having really clearly defined processes, automating as much of it as you can, and doing as much of it as you can at the front end. So whilst the engineer's on site, it's in their brain, not relying on documentation to come back into the organization and then process it, etc.
And Bryn, it's probably worth touching there on part of your vision and desires to digitize the legacy estate, perhaps not using more expensive, dare I say, 3D geometric models, but leaning on laser scan and point cloud technology to achieve a visualization.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're hoping to drive down the LiDAR route because it enables us to prevent a lot of double tapping. Obviously, persons on site, they LiDAR scan this thing to a high level of accuracy, and we're able to then generate 3D models, floor scans, etc. from that. Now, by incorporating those LiDAR scanning projects into our what we call our turnover cycle, means that we're able to then reduce the amount of time between update and refreshing the scan. So yeah, absolutely, it's another way we're looking at dealing with that, preventing stuff becoming legacy.
Yep. Okay. Someone asks, Bryn, is building safety an important driver in your information management, asset management thinking?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's at the core of everything we do. And it's a fundamental driver between the process we're currently undergoing in the data space. Is to make sure we have the data and information we need to ensure that we understand the safety of the buildings. I mean, I can't put it any simpler than that. It's absolutely fundamental to what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Okay. There are two questions about AI, so I'll throw them together. One from David Sexton, one from someone else. David says, do you see AI assisting with estate management processes? The other one asks, I wonder how both of you see AI informing, changing the data collection and analytics process. And you both touched on this already, but maybe go into a bit more detail. And presumably, I say presumably, you'll have various guards in place around ethics and legal, etc.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in there. And the focus today is on handover and digital handover. So massive opportunities to leverage AI for the collation, verification, and validation of building information for handover. I've been doing this for well over 20 years now, and it is the digital handover process is about the collation of information that has already been prepared. It might have been prepared at design stage, at construction stage, or through commissioning stages. And it's about collating, and if you're rewording some of that information to package it up so it's more useful for the end user. Large language models and similar are built to disseminate large information sets and present that in a more user-friendly form. So we're already developing techniques and leveraging AI in regard to the coordination and collation of information for handover, and then moreover the verification and validation of that. In the operational sense then, using a sort of ChatGPT type interface, again, to disseminate and give you very accurate, specific answers to plain language questions about your estate, is something that technology is readily available to do that. And we're already leveraging that in our new building AI assistant in our Nexus platform. So if you're coming along to Digital Construction North, you'll see that in plain sight, and we'll be marketing that going forward. One of the challenges that we've had to overcome is how do we securely provide those answers to estate teams and supply chains, rather than everybody gets the same answer to the same question across an estate, particularly sensitive estate like the MOD. We've got to be very, very specific in who can see what and who gets answers to what questions. So the technology required to achieve that is fairly complicated. But Bryn, over to you for any more further insights.
No, I agree with everything you say. I think from my position in terms of more the delivery side of it, I think, yes, I do see it becoming more integral in the way that we deliver across the estate and we manage the estate. Certainly from a taking the sort of the need to know what question to ask, so we can program it. And again, as IoT and things like that become more common, you're into the world of big data, it has a better ability to look at everything that's coming in and summarize the estate for you. In terms of if we ever get to a point of view where it's actively making decisions on when something should be replaced, whether a lease should be renewed, has something been tendered properly? I noticed there was another comment in there about checking whether information received complies with various standards. I think all of that is in the realms of possibility. I don't think we as an industry are mature enough at the moment to jump to that. I think there's a lot of work in getting the underlying data squared away so that you feed these models the information they need, as Nick says, to get the answers that you want. But absolutely, I do see it becoming central to everything we do in this area.
There's one more monumental opportunity that AI brings, and that is how can we create value from poor legacy data, make that more useful, make it more accessible, rather than you only benefit from good data on new build projects where you can govern and marshal the production of that information. We're already using some techniques with DIO and other partners to leverage AI to take a legacy distributed source of information and make sense of that, adding classifications, tagging information with more useful, user-friendly labels for search engines and similar. So huge opportunities in that regard.
Okay, all right. This question for Bryn, maybe you're not at that stage yet, but and I think this refers back to a previous webinar of ours with a social housing asset owner. But in gathering the information and data about the oldest assets in your portfolio, what have you learned about those assets that you didn't know before?
Brilliant question, and a lot is probably a summarized answer. I think what the key difference has been, and it sticks to the theme of the question, is and the theme of this webinar, to be fair, is what it has really done is it's cemented what was anecdotally known. So the site teams and the area teams knew things, but the systems didn't confirm it. We couldn't understand it. And actually, in gathering the info and data about the oldest assets, what it's done is demonstrate that anecdotal evidence was correct. And it's also helped us re-age various things where we thought they were of X age, therefore everything was at X life cycle. It's corrected that, which has meant interventions have happened a lot sooner than they should have done. I think going back to my opening comments, what it has done is just demonstrate how old the estate is. There's a lot of assets out there that were a bit older than we thought they were. But yeah, the key for me is that it's just cemented what was anecdotally known in a way that's then understandable to everybody else.
Okay. Perhaps the question that what one was expecting the most. As a main contractor, Bryn's is a voice that I only hear at the end of a project. Why is there still disconnection between operational teams' needs and what is asked for in the employer's information requirements from the capital team? The classic disconnect.
That's a great question, and one that we're doing our utmost as an organisation to fix. I think there's lots of reasons for this. That some of the common reasons that we experience is just a lack of stakeholder engagement in the production of information requirements. I think the industry, dare I say this, has been a little bit guilty of adopting boilerplate EIR documents that have been sort of produced by BIM consultancies for all the right reasons for customers and clients and projects, but don't necessarily represent the employer's needs on the next project. But we see a lot of reuse of pretty much the same EIR documents and specific requirements. So I think much more investment from within asset owner teams and estate teams in properly understanding why you need information to operate and maintain your facilities, to manage your estates, to get better insights on how they're used. Do the right work to achieve that, and that can be coordinated by a third party like us or similar teams. But doing that legwork, and we've been fortunate to work with the DIO, accommodation, built estate teams, HMRC more recently. Properly doing that work then allows the EIR to be much more purposeful to what that client needs. And I think people like Bryn and their voice will then be heard very loudly within that suite of BIM specifications. But as an industry, I think we're a long way from that. One of the initiatives that we're engaged with the Start with Smart community, led by Justin Kirby very well, is to think about a minimum viable handover set of requirements, which I strongly believe is still missing in industry and requires some significant work to pull that together. But once we've got that benchmark, we can then look to exceed that expectation. So hopefully that answers the anonymous attendee's question. Bryn, anything to add to that?
No, I would just say I think all of the above, everything you said, and just one around, I think, increasing people's understanding of the difference between capital projects and operational maintenance. I think there's still a little bit of a disconnect between the different mindsets that are required, and it's assumed that if you provide everything you need during design and build, you'll have just by default provisioned everything you need for operational maintenance. And I think it's that educational piece as well.
And I think I didn't quite spot Richard Miles' question afterwards. Is riffing on this, but I'll ask you, and just if there's anything more you want to add. From experience, some clients don't actually know what level and in what detail they require handover information at tender stage or during the ECI stage. Some have asked the contractor to recommend software and levels of detail. How can we as an industry support clients during the tender preparation to define this to a far better level so that contractors and designers can respond accurately?
Yeah, and that's precisely what the minimum viable handover requirements will provide a framework for, not just on the software and levels of detail as Richard pulls out, which is key components to that, but it comes back to that stakeholder piece. These aren't just questions directed at the client themselves, the asset owner, who may have little interaction with the asset. In some cases, it's a portfolio of buildings they happen to own that are occupied by other tenants, that are managed by third parties. So it requires a broader engagement with a wider stakeholder group, internal and external suppliers that will really benefit from better data about that estate and its buildings. So watch this space for some further information on that particular initiative, but we'll be going out to industry to get many stakeholders to participate in that.
I think from my perspective, sorry, Nick, I think the development of a industry standard minimum would be really beneficial. So we did something similar internally. We came up with a document known as the minimum asset data capture, which is attempted to do what Nick's talked about, but it was specifically focused on our estate, which basically took our assets and said, right, against that asset, this is the minimum information we require, which can then be used at future tender processes, et cetera, et cetera. So if you had something akin to that across the whole industry, as Nick's talking, I think that would be a massive step towards resolving that problem.
Yep. Okay. All right. Nick, do you want to tackle Michael Cassidy's question? Is that
Yes, yes,
yeah?
certainly,
Good. Go
certainly.
ahead.
I'll tackle that with a particular case study with another customer partner of ours. That's you.
I'll ask it out loud just so everyone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, go.
That's right. Michael Cassidy asks, which section of Glider might have addressed the shortfall that arose in the Grenfell tragedy? Is there anything in Glider that checks compliance with standards?
Yeah, indeed. So, Unite Students, largest student accommodation developer, owner operator in the UK, approached us a couple of years ago now to with a very focused requirement on Building Safety Act compliance, and the glider capability that wasn't originally designed for that purpose was repurposed, and we've been working hard to develop out the right technological capabilities that are required to create, maintain, and present that golden thread, which it gets pretty complex throughout those gateways. So we've developed said capability, and that enables a dynamic production of building safety case reports through the availability of structured data about assets, but also by virtue of integrations with other CAFM softwares and property management capabilities that Unite students have developed, we're able to provide a more comprehensive audit trail of not just what's designed, built, and handed over, but more importantly, that ongoing maintenance and utilisation of those facilities. So big strides in how we're enabling that capability with our partners.
Okay. Sauna Suresh's question, two or three parts, but maybe some can be answered, some can't. What FM software platforms would you suggest? On a broader area, how would you categorize FM info needed for good CAFM? What is most important regarding information management during handover? Do you want to go first on that, Nick, and then we'll
Sure.
the second part of the question.
Rather than what FM software platforms would I suggest, I think there's a stage before that. I think that the stage before that is, what information do you need as an organization? How do you manage your estate in terms of its day-to-day management, operation, maintenance? We've seen many models, insourced, outsourced teams. So getting a good handle on that should then inform the type of technologies that you require to support that operation and maintenance and asset management regime. So getting a good handle on that before you then go out to market is what I'd suggest you'd start. In terms of information that's needed for what you characterize as good CAFM, and what's the most important regarding information management during handover, Bryn touched on this earlier. Life safety systems, critical systems for the ongoing operation and maintenance of your estate, which might be very different for different asset classes. So what's important to a data center operator is much different to a housing association asset owner. So again, understanding the asset class, the need for information should then inform what is required for good sort of CAFM in terms of ongoing maintenance. But standards like SFG 20 are incredibly helpful in providing a standard approach to the level of maintenance that's required for specific types of plant, equipment, and systems. So I think SFG 20 is a good place to start if you want to get a good handle on a standard approach to what should be maintained across an estate, both for legislative compliance, but also good practice.
Yeah. Bryn, any thoughts?
No, I agree. I would say that jumping straight to the FM software is where a lot of people that I see fall down. Actually, as Nick has just expertly put, if you understand what you need and why you need it, that will then drive the platform that you need. I think there's a default position that if you're in FM, you need a CAFM. That's not the case, in my opinion. CAFMs have their place. They are vital in certain situations, but depending on the nature of your estate and what you're doing on that estate will dictate what style of system you need. So I think understanding what you want, why you want it, and what you're going to do with it as the three core questions will then drive what system you put in place.
Okay, great. And Margaret Saki says, hi guys, great webinar. Just what we need. We have a forum on the 31st of October. We need your input in the university sector. Her question, how can we mandate clients to progress the 19650 journey? Do we need government help?
That's a super question. I think we need all the help we can muster for sure, and government can be very, very helpful in that regard. I think it comes back to understanding the value of information. Just pushing the ISO 19650 framework as a mandate, thou shalt adopt, thinking long and hard about the value that said framework and adoption of said framework provides for different stakeholders, for different needs. I think we should think less about the technicalities and the how-tos and more about the why we should be doing this. And I think there's some great case studies around that talk more about the why, but something that we are improving as a business is, how do we sell our technology to university sectors? And it used to be directly to the more technical teams who are more well versed in BIM technologies and ISO 19650 standards, so they get the need for technology and how, but far less of an understanding exists at the C-suite level. I think that's a completely different approach that's required, and to really understand from a C-suite executive, what do they care about across their estate most, and how can better data availability help achieve those objectives at a sort of more business strategic level. That's where we get much more success in then the eventual adoption of ISO 19650 as a standard. So hopefully that helps answer that question, Margaret. But we would be very interested in coming along to that forum and inputting where we can.
Yeah, I'm sure you can link up on LinkedIn, etc., to discuss that. And then, Bryn, obviously, you are a public sector client. Are you liaising with other public sector client bodies? And I appreciate, the NHS or whatever will have a completely different set of challenges to you, but the challenges, while the same, some of the solutions might be the same.
Yeah, so we do cross-departmental discussions, to use buzzwords. We do spend time talking to other departments. So I talk to HMRC quite a lot, and we share information, we share ideas. We look at where we have got those consistent challenges and how one side's approached it versus the other. And that has fostered some quite interesting approaches to things that have actually been quite different to how we would have done it in the past. But actually, neither of us went with our preferred route, but we ended up going with a route that worked best for both of us. And
Right.
that so begins to bridge that gap between being able to, so some assets over their lifespan will transfer from one government body to another and back to another. So actually, by agreeing these ways of working, it makes that whole transfer a lot easier. So yes, we do talk to other government departments quite a bit about this.
Okay, all right. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to move to wrap up. So let me share the final slide. Reminder to everyone that this webinar has been recorded and will be available on demand a little later today. You can access it via the original registration page, share with colleagues and peers, etc. For more on Glider technology, go to glidertech.com. For more on the Digital Construction Summit and the rest of the webinars, we're running digitalconstructionsummit.co.uk. And of course, keep up to date with construction news, views, etc. on constructionmanagement.co.uk. Again, a reminder that the next webinar is tomorrow at 11 a.m. The key to on-site productivity, eliminate the errors, bit.ly, no more errors. You can still register for that. And it simply remains for me to say thank you to Glider for supporting this webinar. And thank you very much to Nick and Bryn for your time and input this morning. And thank you, the audience, for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity, Justin, and thanks to everyone for attending. Much appreciated. For the great Q&A as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care now. Bye-bye.